The morning began the way most of my mornings had begun for nearly a decade, with the smell of concrete dust, diesel fuel, and cold coffee lingering in the cab of my truck. Construction work has a rhythm to it. The early starts, the heavy air before sunrise, the quiet moment before the machines wake up and the noise of work fills the world. I had always liked that moment. Felt honest. Real. That morning felt normal. Too normal. I parked outside the office building at the Collins construction yard just before 7. The sun was barely climbing over the cranes and unfinished steel frames scattered across the site. For 8 years that yard had been my second home. I had walked those gravel paths through winter snow and summer heat, watched foundations poured and buildings climb story by story into the sky. And for 8 years I had believed I belonged there. After all, I wasn't just an employee. I was family. Howard Collins, the owner of the company, liked to remind people of that. At company dinners, he would clap me on the back and say, "This man's not just one of my supervisors. He's my son-in-law, practically my right hand." I used to feel proud when he said that. Now I understand it was just another lie. When I stepped into the office building that morning, something immediately felt wrong. The reception desk was quiet. Too quiet. Normally Sarah would greet everyone who came through the door with the same tired smile she wore every day. But that morning she barely looked up from her computer. Her fingers kept typing. Too fast. Like she didn't want to make eye contact. "Morning," I said. She gave a quick nod but didn't answer. That was the first crack. The second came when I noticed 2 men from corporate security standing near the hallway that led to Howard's office. They weren't construction guys. Clean shoes, dark jackets, the kind of people who didn't belong in a place filled with mud and dust. One of them looked at me, then quietly spoke into a small radio clipped near his collar. My stomach tightened. Something was wrong. Very wrong. "Howard's waiting for you," one of them said. I walked down the hallway slowly, trying to convince myself this was just some misunderstanding. Maybe an audit. Maybe paperwork. Companies had procedures. Things happened. But when I opened the door to Howard's office, the air inside felt colder than the rest of the building. The blinds were half closed, cutting the sunlight into long, sharp stripes across the floor. Howard sat behind his massive desk, leaning back in his leather chair like a king surveying his kingdom. He didn't smile. He didn't stand up. He didn't even offer a handshake. "Close the door, Ethan." I did. The click of the latch sounded louder than it should have. He folded his hands across his stomach and studied me with a slow, almost disappointed expression. "We've got a serious issue," he said. His tone was calm. Too calm. "What kind of issue?" I asked. Instead of answering, he reached into a folder on his desk and slid several printed pages across the surface toward me. I picked them up. Rows of numbers. System access logs. Timestamps. User credentials. My credentials. "What is this?" I asked. Howard sighed heavily, like a tired father forced to deal with a disappointing child. "Unauthorized activity in the company's internal financial system." I frowned. "I don't even use the accounting system." "Apparently you did," he replied. He tapped one of the printed pages with his finger. "These logins were made late at night. Multiple occasions. Sensitive financial records were accessed. Internal transfers were attempted." My chest tightened. "And you're saying I did that?" "We traced the credentials," Howard said. "They belong to you." "That's impossible." He shrugged. "Then someone used your password." I stared at him. "You think I'm stealing from the company?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly opened another folder and slid a document toward me. A single page. Termination notice. The words felt like they punched the air out of my lungs. "You're firing me?" "Effective immediately," he said. My ears rang. "Howard, I've worked here 8 years." "Yes. I've never taken $1 from this company." He leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said quietly, "someone did. And you're pinning it on me?" "The evidence points to you." I looked at him carefully then. Really looked. And something in his eyes told me this conversation had never been about the truth. The decision had already been made before I even walked into that office. "You set this up," I said quietly. His face hardened. "Careful. You're framing me." Security knocked on the door before he could respond. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't an investigation. It was an execution. Within 10 minutes, I was escorted out of the building like a criminal. Not violently, not loudly, just quietly enough that everyone working in the office could see it happen. 8 years of loyalty reduced to a silent walk through a hallway filled with staring eyes. No one said anything. No one stopped me. The yard outside looked different when I stepped back into the sunlight. The cranes, the unfinished towers, the trucks, everything I had helped build suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. Because it did. I sat in my truck for nearly 15 minutes before starting the engine. My mind kept circling the same thought. Megan would understand. She had to. She was my wife. She knew me better than anyone. I drove home slowly as the sky began turning orange with the setting sun. Our neighborhood looked peaceful, normal, children riding bikes, sprinklers spraying across green lawns. The kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. But when I pulled into the driveway, something immediately felt wrong. The front door looked different. At first I couldn't place why. Then I saw it. The lock. It had been replaced. I walked up the steps slowly and tried my key. It didn't fit. The metal scraped uselessly against the new lock. For a long moment I just stood there. Then I knocked. The door opened slightly. Megan stood in the gap. Her expression was calm. Too calm. "My dad told me what happened," she said. I stared at her. "You believe him?" She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "You should probably stay somewhere else for a while," she said quietly. Behind her, our son Nolan stood in the hallway watching us. "Dad?" he asked softly. "Are we leaving?" Megan didn't answer him. She just closed the door. The new lock clicked into place. And just like that, I lost my job, my home, my wife, all in a single day. There was only one place left I could go. My father, Jack Reed, a quiet old man who lived 2 hours away on the edge of a forgotten town. A man who spent his days fishing and fixing broken radios in a small workshop behind his house. At least, that's what I believed. I didn't know yet that my father wasn't the harmless old man he pretended to be. And I definitely didn't know that by the time the Collins family understood who he really was, it would already be too late. I drove through the dark with Nolan asleep in the back seat and my whole life collapsing mile by mile behind me. The highway stretched ahead in a long black ribbon under the headlights, and every few minutes I looked in the mirror just to make sure he was still there. Curled against the window, small, trusting, oblivious to how quickly the ground had disappeared beneath us. My son had been handed to me like an afterthought when Megan shut that door. No bag, no plan, no apology. Just a child and the wreckage of a day that felt too clean to be accidental. That was what kept circling in my head. Too clean. Too fast. Howard had papers waiting before I arrived. Security was already in place. The locks at the house had already been changed by the time I got home. Megan already had her lines prepared. Stay somewhere else for a while. There may be charges. It all fit together too neatly. Not like a family argument. Like a schedule. Like a trap laid out by people who had spent weeks deciding exactly how to cut me out in one motion. I reached my father's place after midnight. Jack Reed lived on the edge of a small town that most people passed without noticing. One blinking traffic light. One gas station. A diner with a sagging roof and a hand-painted sign out front. His house sat farther out, beyond a line of pine trees and an old wire fence, where the road turned to gravel and the world seemed to give up trying to be modern. It was a narrow one-story place with peeling paint and a porch that leaned slightly to one side. A rusted pickup sat beside a shed, and a single yellow light burned in the kitchen window. If you looked at it from the road, you'd think what I had always thought. An old man living quietly, keeping to himself, waiting for time to finish its work. I killed the engine and sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. Nolan stirred. "Are we here?" "Yeah," I said. "We're here." Jack opened the front door before I even knocked. He stood there in an old flannel shirt, gray hair pushed back, reading glasses low on his nose like he'd been interrupted in the middle of a book. His eyes moved over me once, then to Nolan, then back to me. He didn't ask questions. Not at first. "Bring the boy inside," he said. The house smelled like cedar, coffee, and machine oil from the tiny workshop out back. Nolan was half asleep again by then, so Jack led him to the spare room and tucked him in with a blanket like it was the most ordinary thing in the world to have his grandson arrive after midnight with his father looking like a man who had been hit by a truck. When the door to the spare room closed, Jack turned to me. "What happened?" I told him everything. Not cleanly, not calmly. The words came out in broken pieces, some sharp with anger, others dead with shock. Howard's office. The logs. The firing. The changed locks. Megan's face. Nolan standing in the hallway. The click of the new deadbolt. I expected Jack to react the way he always had to trouble in the past, with a long silence, a small nod, maybe a quiet sentence about people revealing themselves when money gets tight. Instead, he stood perfectly still. Too still. When I finished, he asked only one question. "Did Howard mention debt?" I frowned. "No. Why would he?" Jack ignored that. "Did he push hard on the idea that there could be criminal charges?" "Yes." "And Megan used the same language?" I stared at him. "Yeah." He walked to the kitchen table and sat down slowly. Then he removed his glasses, folded them, and placed them beside an untouched cup of coffee. There was no confusion in his face, no outrage, just a kind of cold attention that made him seem younger and harder than I had seen him in years. "This wasn't personal," he said. I let out a bitter laugh. "It felt pretty personal." "It was designed to feel personal," he replied. "That's different." I said nothing. He looked at me across the table, and for the first time in my life I got the strange sensation that I was not sitting with the father I thought I knew. The old man in a worn flannel shirt was still there, but something beneath that skin had shifted. His posture had straightened. His voice had sharpened. Even his eyes seemed to focus differently, like he was no longer looking at pain but at structure. "Howard is trying to bury something," he said. "What are you talking about?" "The speed, the staging, the house lock, the termination packet, the threat of charges. He needed you removed all at once. That means you were in the way of a clock already ticking." My mouth felt dry. "You're guessing." "No," he said. "I'm recognizing." That word hung in the room. Recognizing. Not guessing. Not suspecting. Recognizing. Jack stood and crossed the kitchen, then opened a narrow drawer built into the wall beside the pantry. I had seen him use it for years to keep envelopes, spare keys, receipts. Nothing unusual. But instead of pulling out old papers, he pressed his thumb to something hidden beneath the lip of the wood. There was a soft click. A second panel inside the drawer slid back. I stared. From the compartment he removed a black phone I had never seen before, a leather folder embossed only with the initials J.R., and a set of reading glasses that looked more expensive than anything else in the house. He put them on. The transformation was so small it should have meant nothing. But it changed everything. "Dad," I said slowly. "What is that?" He turned on the phone. Powered up instantly. No passcode hesitation. No fumbling. He moved with the smooth certainty of habit. "Sit down, Ethan." I stayed standing. He looked at me once, and there was enough command in that glance to make me obey before I even understood why. Then he opened the folder. Inside were account summaries, organizational charts, legal pads filled with names, percentages, dates. Some were printed on thick paper with the kind of clean typography you don't find in a small-town office supply store. At the top of one page, I saw a company name I recognized from financial news. Reed Mercer Capital. I looked up sharply. "That's an investment firm." "Yes. What does that have to do with us?" Jack folded his hands over the folder. "I own it." For a second, I honestly thought I had heard him wrong. "You what?" "I built it 32 years ago," he said. "I stepped back publicly a long time ago. Let younger faces run the visible side. It's quieter that way." I searched his face for a joke, a crack, anything. There was nothing. "No," I said. No. You live here. You fish. You fix radios. He almost smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I do. And I also control a portfolio large enough to erase Howard Collins before breakfast. The room seemed to tilt. I looked around the same worn kitchen I had known since childhood. The faded curtains, the chipped sugar bowl, the hum of the old refrigerator, and suddenly it all looked staged. Not fake, just chosen, like a costume worn for comfort and invisibility. You're serious? Yes. My thoughts stumbled over each other. Why would you hide that from me? Because money attracts parasites. Because visibility creates leverage for other people. Because quiet is safer. Pick any reason you like. He picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. Whoever answered did so on the first ring. This is Reed, Jack said, and his voice had changed completely. It was flatter now, cleaner, carrying the hard edge of a man used to being obeyed. Wake Legal, Compliance, and Forensic Audit. I want a full exposure map on Howard Collins Construction and every related entity by 6 a.m. Pull debt layers, liens, shell holdings, personal guarantees, off-book vendors, all of it. Start with county filings and work outward. Flag unusual transfers in the last 9 months. He listened for a moment. No, this is not routine. Someone moved on my son today. He ended the call and set the phone down. I could only stare at him. My father, who I had always imagined as a lonely old man fading peacefully into the margins of life, was suddenly speaking like the center of a machine I didn't even know existed. Dad. He looked at me. You said Howard accused you through system access logs. That means either he's stupid enough to fabricate evidence badly, or desperate enough not to care if it holds for long. Men like him do not choose that risk unless the alternative is worse. What alternative? Jack's eyes narrowed slightly. Exposure. He made 2 more calls. Short, precise. One to a law firm in Chicago. One to someone he addressed only as Miriam. Every sentence was clipped and surgical. Preserve records. Freeze quiet contact. No external move yet. Nothing theatrical. Not until we know the weight-bearing walls. When he finally put the phone down for good, the kitchen was silent except for the ticking clock over the stove. I felt stupid saying it, but I said it anyway. Who are you? Jack leaned back in his chair. I'm your father, he said. I'm also the man Howard should have prayed never noticed his name. He opened another document and slid it across the table toward me. It was a preliminary debt summary. Howard Collins Construction was leveraged almost beyond belief. Credit lines stacked on credit lines. Properties pledged as collateral. Personal guarantees tied to short-term notes. Several vendor entities with names I didn't recognize, all connected through addresses that looked suspiciously similar. This can't be real, I whispered. It gets worse, Jack said. He tapped a cluster of lines halfway down the page. These shell accounts are moving money in circles. Sloppy layering. Someone is trying to make losses disappear long enough to hold the image together. And me. You had internal access, he said. Not enough to understand the full scheme, but enough proximity to make a useful fall guy. Fire you, blame you, point to compromised credentials, suggest you manipulated records. If auditors come close, Howard says the trusted family insider went rogue. He protects the company, protects himself, and buys time. A sickness rolled through me. He was going to frame me. Yes. I thought about Megan. Her calm face. The door closing. The way she never once asked if it was true. How much did she know? Jack's expression became unreadable. I don't know yet. Yet, that word landed heavier than anything else. He was not speculating anymore. He was already moving. Already dismantling. Already treating my life like a field report in an operation larger than I could see. Then he leaned forward and spoke in the quietest voice of the night. Listen to me carefully, Ethan. By tomorrow afternoon Howard will think he still controls the board. By tomorrow night he'll learn he doesn't control his debt. And once a man loses control of debt, he starts losing everything else with it. I sat there in stunned silence while the old kitchen hummed around us and my father. My impossible, hidden, dangerous father, began to turn my ruin into Howard Collins's countdown. By morning, my father's house no longer felt like the quiet edge of nowhere. It felt like a command post disguised as a kitchen. The same faded curtains hung over the sink. The same old clock ticked above the stove. Nolan still slept in the spare room, safe for the first time since Megan closed that door on us. But everything else had changed. Or maybe it hadn't changed at all. Maybe I had simply been blind my entire life, looking at Jack Reed and seeing only what he allowed me to see. He was already awake when I came in. Not just awake. Working. 3 phones sat on the table now. The black one from the hidden compartment, a second slim silver phone, and his old battered flip phone that suddenly looked less like habit and more like camouflage. Beside them were printed files, legal pads, a yellow marker, and a laptop so thin and expensive it looked absurd on that scarred wooden table. He didn't look up right away. "Coffee's fresh," he said. "Take it black. You're going to need your head clear." I poured a cup and sat across from him. My hands still felt heavy, like my body hadn't caught up to the fact that everything I thought I knew about my father had shattered sometime after midnight. He turned one of the documents toward me. "This is Howard's real balance sheet," he said. I stared at the pages. Even without understanding every line, I could see the shape of disaster. Loans folded into short-term notes. Vendor debt hidden behind holding companies. Properties leveraged twice. Equipment leased through subsidiaries that looked legitimate until you noticed the same registered agent on half the paperwork. "It's worse than you thought," I said. "It's worse than he thought," Jack replied. He tapped a section marked with a red line. "These are bridge notes. Predatory terms. High interest, short maturity, personal guarantees. Men take this kind of money only when traditional lenders stop returning their calls." I looked up. "So he's broke." "He's beyond broke. Broke is when a man runs out of money. Howard has run out of time." Jack slid a second document to me. This one was shorter, cleaner. A list of debt holders, note values, and acquisition status. 3 of them already had green marks beside them. "What am I looking at?" "My people were busy before sunrise," he said. "We bought those positions." I blinked. "Bought them?" "Yes." "You mean you bought Howard's debt?" He met my eyes over the rim of his coffee mug. "That is exactly what I mean." Something cold moved through me. Howard had spent years acting untouchable. In his office, at family dinners, at company events, he had always carried himself like a man who owned gravity itself. And now my father was sitting in a worn kitchen in a forgotten town, buying pieces of his life before breakfast. How much of it? Enough to hurt him. Not enough to alert him yet. Jack gave the smallest nod. He was patient. That was what frightened me most. Not angry. Not impulsive. Patient. Like a man laying wires through walls before flipping a switch. He opened the laptop and showed me a series of charts. Colored lines. Maturity dates. Cross-default triggers. A map of pressure points I could barely follow. "When one note fails, this covenant triggers," he said, pointing. "That pulls stress here, then here. His vendors start to worry. His private lenders tighten. His properties stop protecting him and start dragging each other down." I rubbed my face. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't easy. It's expensive. There's a difference." He looked toward the hallway to make sure Nolan was still asleep, then lowered his voice. "Howard survives by confidence. That's the real asset. Not trucks. Not land. Not equipment. Confidence. Men lend to him because they think he'll stay standing. Contractors follow him because they think he can still pay. The board obeys because they believe he knows where the exits are. You don't beat a man like that with fists. You make everyone around him doubt the floor." I leaned back and stared at the numbers again. "So what happens now?" "Now," he said, "I stop him from refinancing." He made a call on the silver phone. Not long. Not dramatic. Just a quiet conversation with someone in New York who called him Mr. Reed, and listened without interrupting. Jack never raised his voice. Never had to. He asked for a review of pending credit extensions tied to Collins Construction and certain related entities. He named 6 shell companies from memory. He requested discretion, then ended the call. 10 minutes later, he made another. This time to a regional bank I recognized, because Howard had once boasted at Thanksgiving that they would back him through anything. Jack listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, the words were precise. Exposure concentration. Undisclosed affiliate risk. Potential forensic review. Material misrepresentation. He hung up and wrote one word on a yellow pad. Shaken. That bank won't save him now, he said. I should have felt satisfaction. I tried to, but what I mostly felt was shock. The speed of it. The scale. Yesterday I had been thrown out of my life with my son standing beside me. This morning my father was quietly turning financial institutions into blades. What if he comes after us harder? I asked. Jack looked mildly offended by the question. He already did. I mean legally, publicly, whatever he has left. He will, Jack said. That's why we let him make the next mistake. There was a knock at the door. I tensed automatically. Jack didn't. He rose, opened it, and let in a woman in her 50s wearing a charcoal coat and carrying 2 flat cases. She moved like someone used to airports, courtrooms, and expensive emergencies. No wasted motion. No surprise at the setting. "Morning, Reed," she said. "Miriam." She glanced at me. "Ethan." I stood. "Do I know you?" "No," she said. "But I know the version of you Howard is preparing." She set the cases on the table, opened one, and revealed more files, a tablet, and what looked like preliminary forensic reports. "Counsel and crisis containment," she said to me, as if that explained everything. "Your father asked me to get ahead of the narrative." The word narrative made my jaw tighten. "So there is one." "There always is," she said. "In scandals, facts travel second." She showed me a draft timeline Howard's side was likely already building. Unauthorized access, internal concern, family distress, emergency termination, possible law enforcement referral. It made me sick because it looked believable if you didn't know the truth. Miriam tapped the screen. "He needs you guilty fast. If auditors start asking why company losses surfaced near the same time as debt pressure, he'll point at you. Family access, technical access, emotional instability. He'll say you panicked and tried to cover something." I laughed once. Short, bitter. Emotional instability. Convenient. "Very," she said. Jack handed her a paper with highlighted names. "Any connection on Megan?" She scanned it. "Not yet direct. But there are unusual transfers into a trust linked to Howard's daughter over the last 6 months. We're still unwinding them." My throat tightened. Megan. Even hearing her name now felt like touching a live wire. "You think she knew?" I asked. Miriam didn't soften her face. "I think money leaves tracks. Knowledge usually rides with it." Jack stepped in before I could say anything else. "One thing at a time." No, not one thing at a time. Everything at once. That was how my life had been taken from me. Job, house, wife, reputation. All in one day. I wanted certainty. I wanted one clean piece of truth I could hold without it changing shape in my hands. Instead, I got another document. This one showed internal Collins Company permissions. My permissions. Or rather, the permissions someone had temporarily escalated without my knowledge. I stared at the timestamps. Someone changed my access. "Yes," Miriam said, briefly, then rolled it back. Sloppy, but enough to create a log trail. "So they used my credentials to build a frame." She nodded once. "That's what it looks like." For a long moment I could not speak. I thought of Howard sitting behind his desk with that practiced disappointment. I thought of Megan standing behind a door she had already chosen not to open. I thought of Nolan asking if we were leaving. The trap had been built in code, signatures, locks, timing, and silence. It had never been chaos. It had been choreography. Jack watched me steadily. "I told you, this was not a family argument." My hands curled into fists. "I want to go to him." "And do what?" I didn't answer, because I knew the answer was nothing useful. Jack rose and walked to the window, looking out across the yard where morning light lay pale over wet grass and old fence posts. "When I was younger," he said, "I made a mistake once. A man thought he could outplay me, so I met him face to face. I wanted him to see my anger, wanted him to feel it." He turned back toward me. "Do you know what anger gave him?" I shook my head. "Time. He used my anger to make himself the victim. He hid behind it. He reorganized, gathered sympathy, rewrote the story." Jack's eyes hardened. "We are not giving Howard time." He returned to the table and picked up a fresh page. "By noon, we'll control enough paper to trigger a private restructuring notice. By end of day, we'll know which board members can be frightened and which can be bought. By tomorrow, the lenders he is counting on will begin asking him questions he cannot answer without lying." Miriam closed one case and checked her watch. "There's more. One of the shell vendors paid a consultant retainer to an outside cybersecurity firm." I frowned. "Why does that matter?" "Because they weren't hired to protect the company," she said. "They were hired to create a plausible intrusion story." The room seemed to narrow around me. Howard had not simply decided to blame me after the fact. He had built the blame in advance. Jack didn't even blink. He just wrote another word on the pad. Premeditated. Then he looked at me, and in his face I saw not comfort but commitment. Colder thing. Stronger. "He wanted a scapegoat," Jack said. "Instead, he gave me motive. He made one final call before noon. I never learned the name of the man on the other end. I only heard Jack say, 'Acquire the remaining maturities. All of them. Quietly, through secondaries if you must.' I don't want Howard hearing my name until the doors are already closing." When he hung up, the kitchen felt still again. Ordinary, almost. An old house. Coffee cooling in mugs. My son asleep down the hall. And beneath that ordinary silence, my father had just reached into Howard Collins's future and started removing pieces. I looked at the yellow pad on the table. 3 words stared back at me in Jack's neat handwriting. Shaken. Premeditated. Exposed. Then he added a 4th. Owned. He set the pen down and finally allowed himself the smallest, hardest smile I had ever seen on his face. "Now," he said, "we begin taking away everything he thought made him untouchable. I thought revenge would look dramatic, loud, satisfying. A man like Howard Collins had spent so many years performing power that I expected his decline to come with shattered glass, screaming matches, slammed doors, maybe even handcuffs in a parking lot. But that was not how it began. Real collapse was quieter than that. More humiliating. It started in the pauses between phone calls, in the way confident men began speaking too fast, then too slow, then not at all. For 3 days I stayed at my father's house with Nolan while Jack moved pieces I could barely see. He was on the phone before sunrise and after midnight, never wasting a word, never raising his voice. That was the worst part of watching him work. He was never theatrical. He never spoke about revenge as if it were a feeling. To him it was structure, sequence, pressure applied at the right points until a man discovered that his entire life had been built on rotten beams. By the end of the 2nd day, Howard's lenders were calling emergency reviews. By the end of the 3rd, 2 vendor contracts had frozen. By the 4th, one of the banks he had boasted about for years sent notice that further extensions were suspended pending clarification of exposure and internal controls. Jack read each update with the same expressionless calm. I did not. I wanted to see Howard panic. I wanted to hear the crack in his voice. I wanted proof that he understood what he had done to me. But all I had were fragments. A forwarded memo. A market whisper. A board contact suddenly refusing to return his calls. The destruction was happening just out of sight, like fire traveling behind the walls of a house that still looked standing from the street. Then came the first real crack. Miriam arrived just after lunch carrying a slim folder and a face even colder than usual. She set the file in front of Jack, then turned it toward me. Inside were photographs, not grainy surveillance shots, clean images, taken from a private dining room in an expensive restaurant downtown. In the first photo, Megan sat across from a man I recognized only from old charity brochures and business pages. Bradley Mercer. Real estate money. Old family money. The kind of man who wore wealth so easily it looked like skin. In the second photo, his hand was over hers. In the third, they were leaving through a side entrance together, close enough that there was no innocent explanation left to hide behind. My mouth went dry. When were these taken? I asked. Miriam answered without softness. The first set is 6 weeks old. The most recent is 3 nights before Howard fired you. I kept staring at the pictures. Megan looked relaxed. Not trapped. Not conflicted. Relaxed. Her face carried none of the tension I had seen at the door when she shut me out. No fear. No doubt. Only the calm focus of a woman already stepping into another life. There's more, Miriam said. I didn't want more. She gave it anyway. Bradley had recently purchased a condo in Megan's name through a trust arrangement connected to one of Howard's attorneys. The place had been furnished before I lost my job. Utility accounts opened. Insurance activated. Parking registered. A life prepared in advance. Not after. Before. The room went so silent I could hear the refrigerator humming in the next room. Jack did not look surprised. I hated him a little for that in the moment, though I knew it was irrational. He had warned me. One thing at a time, he had said. But now the truth was all at once anyway, and it burned hotter for having waited. She knew, I said. No one answered. She knew, I repeated louder this time. Jack folded his hands over the folder. The evidence suggests she was planning an exit before Howard moved against you. That's not an exit. My voice sounded wrong, rough and thin. That's betrayal. I stood so fast my chair scraped hard across the floor. Nolan was in the back room watching cartoons with headphones on. Safe. Oblivious. Thank God for that. Because I could feel something breaking loose inside me. Something ugly and hot. And I did not want him to see it. She let me come home to a changed lock, I said. She looked me in the face, knowing she already had another place waiting. She handed me our son like luggage and shut the door. Jack said nothing. I laughed once, and the sound had no humor in it. All that time I thought maybe she was weak, maybe scared of Howard, maybe cornered. But she wasn't cornered. She was already gone. Miriam slid one last page from the folder. Bank transfer summaries. Dates. Amounts. Enough to establish a pattern. Not enough yet for court, but enough for truth. Do not confront her yet, she said. I turned on her. You think I care about strategy right now? Yes, she said flatly. Because if you go to her in this state, she and Howard will make you the unstable husband, the discarded employee, the man lashing out because his wife moved on. They will use your pain as cover. Jack finally spoke. Sit down, Ethan. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to drive straight back to the city, drag the truth into daylight, and force all of them to look at me while they lied. But I sat, because deep down I knew he was right. Howard had built his protection out of timing and narrative. If I moved too soon, I would become another useful detail in his story. So I sat there with Megan's betrayal open on the table between us like an autopsy report. Jack pushed the photos aside and replaced them with a different set of papers. While you were learning what she is, he said. Howard was losing what he is. I looked down. 2 of his personal properties were under review by creditors. A private equipment lender had accelerated 1 note. A board member had quietly resigned. Another had requested indemnification language from outside counsel, which Miriam told me was the polite way of saying men start protecting themselves when they smell blood. He's wobbling, Jack said. And wobbling men make mistakes. What mistake? Miriam answered. He scheduled a charity gala for tomorrow night and refused to cancel. I frowned. A gala? He needs the appearance of stability, she said. Sponsors, city officials, lenders, press, board contacts. If he cancels, people assume weakness. If he attends, he gambles that the room will still believe in him long enough to buy another week. Jack's face went hard in that quiet way of his. He wants a stage, he said. So we'll give him one. That night I did not sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Megan at that restaurant table with Bradley's hand over hers. Then the images shifted, Megan at the door. Megan turning the new lock. Megan saying stay somewhere else for a while as if she were discussing weather. I kept replaying our last months together, testing every conversation, every silence, every moment I had mistaken routine for marriage. There had been late evenings she explained away as errands. Messages she angled her phone away from me to read. A new perfume she said she bought because it was on sale. Small things. Forgettable things. That was the cruelty of betrayal. It always looked obvious after it was finished. Around 2 in the morning I found Jack in the kitchen, awake in the dark with only the stove light on. He was reading a briefing packet and making notes in the margin. "You ever regret knowing how to do this?" I asked. He didn't look up at first. "Do what?" "Destroy people." He set the pen down. "No," he said. "I regret needing to." That answer sat between us for a while. Then he added, "Howard didn't make one cruel decision. He made many disciplined ones. He planned your fall. He weaponized family. He prepared your replacement. Men like that don't stop when you forgive them. They stop when something stronger than appetite closes around their throat." The next afternoon we drove into the city. Not to confront anyone. Not yet. Jack had a meeting at a private office tower downtown, and I stayed in the car with Nolan while Miriam took him inside for 20 minutes. When they returned, Jack carried nothing new, but his face had that sharpened stillness I had learned to recognize. "What happened?" I asked. "We bought the last clean exit Howard had," he said. I frowned. "Meaning?" He was negotiating an emergency rescue through a secondary credit vehicle backed by 3 private partners. "Not anymore." "You stopped it." "I own it." I stared at him. He looked out the windshield toward the city skyline, where glass towers reflected the dying light like knives. "Howard spent years believing power meant having people under him," Jack said. "He never understood that real power is being the thing under everyone else." The gala began at 7. Black cars, silk dresses, champagne, polite laughter drifting through the entrance of a museum Howard had sponsored for years to polish the Collins name. Jack didn't take me inside that night. "Not yet. That would come later," he said. Timing mattered. But he parked across the street and let me watch as Howard arrived. He smiled for the cameras. He waved. Megan stepped out behind him wearing a dark gown I had never seen before. Bradley arrived separately 10 minutes later, and though he did not stand beside her, he didn't need to. I saw the glance they exchanged under the awning. Quick, certain, practiced. Something inside me went cold. Not hot anymore. Cold. Jack watched the entrance with his hands folded over the steering wheel. "Good," he said quietly. I looked at him. "Good." They came. Across the street, the Collins family walked into bright light, believing they were still entering the room as important people. They had no idea the floor under them was already gone. And for the first time since Howard fired me, since Megan locked me out, since my life was stripped in a single day, I understood what my father had been building all along. Not anger, not spectacle, judgment. And tomorrow night, in front of everyone who still mattered to Howard Collins, that judgment was going to arrive.